Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, the Filmmakers Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Michael Azevedo. Joining me on this episode is Andy DeMeo, the creator and host of the Granite Goodness podcast and Substack newsletter. Andy has a belief that most news thrives on outrage, fear, and conflict, and he created Granite Goodness in order to take a different approach. The podcast and newsletter highlights what Andy calls real progress happening across New England in science, technology, sustainability, business, economics, infrastructure, and more. It's Andy's contention that when people see a better world is possible, they're more likely to build it. At the core of Granite Goodness is a belief that optimism is pragmatic, not naive, and it just may be contagious. I really enjoyed this wide-ranging chat with Andy DeMeo, and I hope you do too. Making Media Now is sponsored by Filmmakers Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting media makers from across the creative spectrum. From providing fiscal sponsorship to presenting an array of informative and educational programs, Filmmakers Collaborative supports creatives at every step in their journey. To learn more, visit filmmakerscollab.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please do like, share, follow, leave a review. Every little bit helps. Now on to my conversation with Andy DeMeo. Andy DeMeo, welcome to Making Media Now.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Absolutely. It's great to be speaking with you about Granite Goodness, your Good News for New England podcast. It's a website, and your website kind of acts kind of like a clearinghouse for other organizations that are bringing good news to New England. But before we take a deep dive to find out what Granite Goodness is all about, let's talk a little bit about what Andy DeMeo is all about. Give us a bit of the Andy DeMeo origin story.
Sure. Gosh, I mean, where do you want to begin? I was born in 1995, and so I was actually born in Florida, and I lived there for like 2 weeks, and then I was shipped up here, and I've been here ever since. So this funny distinction people sometimes make of like born and raised in New Hampshire, born and raised in New England. Like I can't quite say I was born here.
Well, which 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Don't tell anyone, because my entire identity is, about hawking the Granite State in New England and all this stuff. And
I'm still fixated right now on the phrase of you being shipped up here at 2 weeks. Were you boxed up? A lot of padding involved?
Right. I believe I was on a plane. I'm sure my parents took very good care of me. I don't remember it very clearly, but who knows? I could have been put on I don't really know. Yeah. So I've lived in New Hampshire my entire life, more or less. I've lived a couple summers in Boston and Maine, done a bunch of traveling all around New England. And, I've always tried to orient my career and the things I do in my life around environmentalism, right? Like the environment, being a steward of the environment is an important value set for a lot of people in New England. We have a lot of beautiful nature up here. I studied conservation in college. And, somewhere along the way, like I started working at this really cool company that, does sustainability oriented investing, right? So like they're the best in the world at, hey, you want to find a good investment opportunity, but you also want it to be related to something, that's going to be a part of this transition to a more sustainable economic system, right? So like resource efficiency or, renewable energy or, batteries, like all these things that you can think of. One of the world experts in this, they have an office in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, of all places. So I worked there for a while and came to this really funny place, right? Where like I had studied the environment in college and a bunch of my friends had as well. And, the environment is not always a place where we're used to hearing like good news or positive news. Mm-hmm. And, I was very, there was this cognitive dissonance, right? Where like I had this experience in the private sector where I was exposed all the time to like really innovative companies, really forward-thinking businesses that were just, solving for these really hard problems that were going to, do this thing that feels impossible and counterintuitive. They're going to create material prosperity for people and for their shareholders, but also actually reduce the environmental, kind of footprint or the environmental inputs of, what their business requires, right? So I was like, whoa, this is a super optimistic lens to have on a lot of these complex issues, right? Like pollution or renewables and all that. But a lot of my friends who don't work in the space, they're getting a very different view because, they're only seeing, the regular news media, which, has such an incentive to tell and curate the stories that are the most sensational and dramatic. And so I was like, something is not quite aligning about how I'm learning about these issues and how a lot of my colleagues are learning about these issues. There's a better story to tell here. And that is what turned me on to this whole world of progress journalism and progress studies, right? This big question of like, hey, is the world a better place than it used to be? In what ways is it? Can we measure those? Can we understand how and why it happened? And that is the 10,000 foot view of, who I am and how I got interested in this concept of granite goodness.
And what gave you the internal drive to make the jump, and jump maybe isn't the right word, but to extend your interest, in this field to going into a form of media making, which is what we talk about here, media making, to host a podcast, to be an interviewer, to find these stories, because I want to talk about your process of how you curate the stories and what you choose to, bring to the masses. Did you have any role models in terms of that? Was there anybody doing what you thought you wanted to do, and you said to yourself, hey, this is doable?
Oh, very much, very much. Yeah, I very clearly, I wrote on my sleeve and just explicitly, like, I am copying the lens of other creators, people who are more like, they're like actual journalists. The two organizations that really inspired me are called Fix the News, right? They're an Australian outlet. They're really small. They used to be called Future Crunch. They've kind of splintered off into their own organization that just focuses on like the positive news stuff. And then there's an American nonprofit called the Progress Network that is kind of a clearinghouse, right? Like to use your language earlier. They convene all these organizations that, share this view of, hey, we have problems in the world, but there is so much in the regular discourse and incentive of media that focuses on the things that are wrong with the world, as opposed to the things that, to the average person, and again, it's a political question in some ways, but to the average person are going right or going well, or saying, okay, this is an issue that's getting better, right? So these are two organizations. I think they're the best in the world at this concept, and there's a lot of people now who do it. They were kind of the first through the gate. Fix the News was really the original people. And, they both, this format of, okay, they do both, right? Fundamentally, what these people do is they curate these newsletters. They write these newsletters that are comprised of all these stories, right, of progress from around the world that, you might encounter, you probably wouldn't, but you definitely wouldn't see them in the same place, right? And so if we think about the concept of what we collectively, like as a society, define as newsworthy, right? It tends to be things that are, one, new, right? Obviously. But when you peel that back a little bit, it's like, okay, it also tends to be things that are, dramatic and shocking. And you can even chart, like there's this beautiful, it's horrible, but it's really insightful chart on the website, for Fix the News that charts, hey, if you look at every word in the English language, that's been published in the media across the last 25 years, and you say, okay, how many words are there that denote feelings of anger, fear, disgust, sadness, depression, anxiety? It's just been an explosion. Like it's gone way, way up since the 90s. And, which isn't to say people don't have good reasons to be upset or scared about the state of the world, but is that always an accurate way, right, to view the state of our relationship to complex problems, right? And so
I would say accurate, or is it the unitary way? Is it the only way? Because there can be slices of accuracy along a continuum. So,
yes.
Maybe the slice of information that the news broadcast or the clickbait headline is giving you in and of itself is quote unquote accurate, but is it the full story?
Yes, exactly. And it's a really interesting question, right? Again, for people making media today, particularly people who, are news outlets or commentators, like, because again, I mean, not to like this whole concept of fake news, like there's a kernel of truth to all the critiques that exist of like the digital media, right? And what I've found is it's rare that a news outlet will publish something that is outright false, right? Like usually it's accurate in terms of like the literal thing that they're saying. But as you said, it's really often lacking in, context, or they're omitting information, right? And there are biases that exist. And, that's a whole other conversation that like my whole contention, right? And the contention of a lot of people who, study this stuff and do it at a higher and superior level than myself is, forget political biases. Like there's a very strong bias for negativity and drama and sensationalism,
right.
and it's not because, I don't I think journalism is super important. I think the news media is super important, and we need all these people, but the business landscape has changed a lot. And I think a lot of these outlets are in the unfortunate position of saying, well, hey, we need the eyeballs, we need the attention, we need it, even in the most noble interpretation, like we need that to fund what we think is important journalism, right? And so it's like, I'm not trying to poo-poo, the important work that a lot of journalists do, but I think you can make a pretty strong argument that the news is heavily biased to present things in a way that is negative or threatening or scary. And if that's all you pay attention to, or that's all you see, again, I don't think that's an accurate way to view the state of the world or a relationship to complex problems. And I don't think that it's an empowering view, let alone one that, feels good or is pragmatic. And so these organizations, they present a different view, right? And they say, okay, here's all these things around the world that are, good in our view, right? Like there's less people dying from some disease. Like I'll give you an example, the country of Senegal, right? Which is a nation in West Africa. 15 million people live there, I think. I'm not used to thinking about Senegal very much. I don't think most Americans are. But a couple of weeks ago, the entire country was declared free from this disease, trachoma. It's a horrible eye infection that makes you go blind. And there was a coordinated public health campaign, that the government undertook for like 20 or 30 years to free the country from this disease. And they're not the only country this year that has eliminated trachoma. Like this has happened, fairly frequently. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, if I compare that story, right, 15 million people who are no longer suffering from this horrible thing, and then you compare it to like a lot of the stories that are regularly presented to us in the media, it's like, are all those stories really more important than this massive reduction in human suffering, right?
Yep.
Maybe, but probably not in a lot of ways. And so it's a kind of provocative way to think about what we pay attention to, the state of the world. Are things getting better or worse? And there's endless examples I could go into, but I really am following the mold of those two organizations and applying their lens to New England, because it's a novel way to look at, news and our relationship to problems. And I didn't see anybody doing it around here. So I was motivated to do it for that reason, to answer your actual question.
It's also an empowering way to look at the world, to your point of, you mentioned a few minutes ago when you were working for the organization that helps fund sustainable efforts and so forth, and your view of these efforts and the incremental progress within them was very different from maybe friends of yours whose idea of environmentalism or sustainability was only derived from maybe headlines, because those headlines are making this false promise to the reader saying, don't worry, we're not going to get complex with you. We're going to give it to you simple. Well, the fact of the matter is the world isn't simple. It is complex. And, when I hear people talk about, well, the news only gives you bad news, that's true. But why does it give me bad news? It gives me bad news because they have data that says, well, that's the headline you're going to click on. That's the story you're going to watch. As I'm sure you're familiar with, the dictum in particularly local news is, if it bleeds, it leads. If it thinks, it stinks.
Right.
So I always feel like the citizens, whether you're a viewer or a reader or a consumer of media in one other form or another, that responsibility to a degree is on you. If you keep telling the media makers, the news makers of the world that, Keep it simple and black and white. Tell me who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. Who should I hate? Who should I not hate? Then they're just going to regurgitate that type of content that taps into that lizard brain of yours that is fear-based.
Yes.
And so, as you know, one of the things that I found really attractive about your podcast and about kind of the whole mission around it is the way that you're shining the light on people who say, yeah, there are difficulties, there are challenges, but a word that you keep mentioning is progress. We are pushing against the darkness, right? We're bringing in more of a solutions orientation, and you're focusing on those types of stories in New England. What we'll forget about those first 2 weeks of your life, but as a lifelong New Englander, what do you think it is about the New England character that is more solutions oriented, is more of a mindset where, things can be tough, but progress is possible?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good question, and one I'm trying to tease out all the time, right? There's this phrase that I probably overuse, and I wrote this piece about it, but this concept of Yankee dynamism, right?
Sure.
I like to combine these things because, a lot of the traditional, New England is a very unusual place, right? Which you understand and talk about all the time. The American Revolution was started here. This is a more, progressive part of the country, not even in terms of the modern political moniker progressive. I just mean a lot of the innovations in technology and even socially, right? New England was anti-slavery before the rest of the country was. New England
first public school system, first public library, untold medical advances, untold technological innovation. Originated in New England. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. There's a really fascinating mix of people and, societal forces and technology that has just converged in this place over the last 100 or 200, 300 years. Right. And when we think of how that manifests today, there's really no wrong way to answer the question of what makes New England unique, so much, right? The stats speak for themselves. It's a very developed region. People live really good lives here. I could go on and on and on.
Well, you've got five of the top 17. If you look at the top 17 states in terms of household income, five of them are in New England.
Yes.
4 of the top 10 states in the U.S. in terms of percentage of college graduates are in New England. That's not coincidental.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not. And when you think really of and comedians are starting to pick up on this. I saw a couple of clips a couple of weeks ago where, someone was remarking Boston and New England, is this really unusual place? And I even just had a couple tourists who they shared this sentiment, right? Of on the one hand, we have a reputation for being very politically liberal, right? Where it's okay, we're very comfortable, we're very supportive of gay people and LGBT issues, but at the same time, Bostonians in particular, but a lot of New Englanders arguably have a reputation for being a little brusque or a little blunt or,
Sure.
cold and stuff like that. So it's this weird synthesis of these people who are quite tolerant, right? But also have this kind of standoffish, blunt way of communicating, right? Is very unusual, right? And it's I think unique relative to a lot of other parts of the country. And I love thinking about well, why is it that people someone in Boston they'll both be yeah, get the heck out of here, brother, whatever it is. But they'll also be super duper liberal in a lot of respects, right? And so,
what a complicated question, because it it really starts to scratch at the surface of, well, what is Boston comprised of, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you really start peeling that onion, there's a lot of tribalism that was determined by whatever ethnicity you or your great grandfather were, and if you look at sort of how Boston was settled, there's a lot of that in play, which, as you said, that reveals a lot of the idiosyncrasies of
Yes.
the Boston area. And then the question is, well, how representative of New England is Boston? And I would say
Right.
it's somewhat representative,
Right.
maybe philosophically representative to a certain degree,
Yeah.
but from a demographic standpoint, maybe less so.
Right.
When I was looking at your website, one of the things that jumped out at me was you have a section on why granite goodness, and
Yes.
the word granite is really doing a lot of work in the definition of your podcast and kind of your mission. Tell us about that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I am based here in New Hampshire, from New Hampshire, very, very proud of the Granite State and, the values and traditions and, identity of the people here. New Hampshire, right, is known as the Granite State for its abundance of granite, and there's all these quarries. Granite is also found all over New England. Like, it's not just like there's giant slabs of it all over the place, right? And, so I began with Granite Goodness. And it's funny, I actually didn't even realize this until like a year in, because I wanted it to be like, okay, originally it was just about New Hampshire, right? Like for the first 8 months or so, it's just focused on New Hampshire. And then I realized the opportunity is there to focus on all New England. There's enough similarities and, expand the scope a little bit. And for a while, Michael, it was funny. I was struggling to think of like, okay, because what I'm doing that I think is more unique. There's a lot of people in kind of the positive news world, even when people think of the phrase good news, and this distinction of like, well, what phrase do I use? Progress or good news, right? Like when you say good news to a lot of people, what they think of is, okay, if there's a 30-minute newscast, it'll be 27 minutes of the regular, doom and gloom and horrible things. And then maybe 3 minutes of like this palate cleansing. Oh, here's an act of kindness or some small act of charity. That's like a nice thing. And it's this very bizarre, insinuation that you get in the media a lot of the time that like that because a cat has been rescued in a tree by a fireman, that you should feel better about, war and famine and death, and all these things that are regularly presented to you. Right. And so I find that so off-putting, and I don't like that framing. What I much prefer is this concept of we shouldn't be afraid to ask these big questions. Like, what is the average person's life compared to 200 years ago? Does the average child today live a longer, healthier, happier life than they used to? If they do, where does that happen? Why did that happen? Right. And, when you zoom out, the world is not a perfect place, but there is an astonishing amount of progress that has been made in both enhancing, the well-being of human beings, but also increasingly our relationship to the environment. Like, and I think we're going to get there. It's slow, steady, but this notion of progress is a thing. So
progress is typically measured in the collective. Progress can't work if it's only measured by individual needs and gains. And so when you talk about things like whether you're talking about lifespans, or what's actually more in vogue these days is to speak about health spans. It's not so much about how long you live, but what's the quality of your life, right? The trajectory has been on an upward scale, whether you're talking globally or nationally or regionally. Now, I'm going to put an asterisk on had been. There are movements taking place right now as we speak that threaten progress in a lot of areas. But
for sure.
Yeah, we needn't necessarily get into that. But it's almost impossible to define progress without acknowledging that the definition of progress isn't everybody's going to get exactly what they want. The definition is, in the aggregate, as a whole, we're all going to benefit from this and position ourselves to be stronger.
Yes. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And the guy who started Fix the News, right, this wonderful journalist, Angus Hervey, he has this great quote that I think summarizes and the appropriate way to feel like about the sentiment you just raised, right? So he likes to say, progress is not a rule. Right. Up and to the right is not, it's not like the natural state of anything. It's contested terrain. right?
Absolutely.
So it's a recognition that, and this is why like it's so fun to talk about these things, because it's like, okay, well, how did it just happen that like the average kid, that in the year 1800, 20% of children born don't live to the age of 5, and today it's like only 1 in 100, will die before they're 5 years old, and even 1 is horrible, obviously, but like that's a pretty astonishing improvement in like human well-being, and we should all be curious about how and why that happened. But yeah, I mean, so granite goodness, right? To answer the other question is focusing on good news that isn't fluffy stuff, right? Like it's not small potatoes. I don't do stories that are just, people being nice or doing, one-off acts of charity. Like what I try and curate is examples of our systems, right? In economics, in governance, in science and technology, producing positive outcomes that you wouldn't really know about unless you saw them all compiled in the same place. And so it's kind of, in terms of its scope, categorically opposite to what we define as newsworthy, right? And the goal isn't to try and get people to be like, oh, whoopee, like there's no problems, we should just be happy optimists all the time. But like I'll give you an example that is New England centric. Opioids, right? Horrible issue, ugliest thing you could think of. It's just bad in every way. There's corporations are mixed up in this. There's drug cartels. It ruins people's lives. Like it's an incredibly messy, ugly topic, right? And one that there has not been a lot of like good news about. Like this is a problem that year over year for the last decade or so, as people just look and say, this is just getting worse and worse and worse, right? The last couple years, actually, I mean, we'll see if it holds. I hope it does. We may have peaked as a nation in terms of the number of people who die every year from an opioid overdose. Mm-hmm. It may have peaked in 2023. There was a national decline in deaths from opioid overdoses from 2023 to 24 of about like 22% or something, which is a pretty great reduction. And in that same year in New Hampshire and Maine, they're slightly different, but both about the same, there was a reduction of like 35 to 37% of the number of people who died from opioid overdoses in New Hampshire and Maine, right? Which is like, this is an incredible thing to have happen, right? And getting at this, a complicated statement of it's still horrible, right? Even one person dying from an opioid overdose is really, really bad. But to understand, okay, it's actually getting better. And, not all of it's getting better, but, the number of people whose lives literally end because of an opioid issue,
sure,
that may have peaked, and we are outpacing the national rate of recovery in New Hampshire and Maine.
And I know you had a guest on your podcast who
Mark Lefebvre,
talked about that in particular, and and that is a wonderful story of progress in the right direction, and the incentives around that progress would seem to be obvious. We want fewer people dying, just as the incentives around what made that scourge possible were financial incentives on the part of, say, Purdue pharmacy, right? Pharmaceuticals, I should say, that said, we have evidence that indicates that this painkiller is highly addictive. Mm-hmm. Don't let that part get out.
Right.
So you have one very clear incentive, which was strictly monetary, and then you've got another incentive, which is societal, after way too many years and hundreds of thousands of deaths, if not more. Right. So it's like now that those who are driven by financial gain have done their damage, it's up to the people that you're having conversations with to come in and show that there's another definition of progress.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's all true, right? And this is why I like the approach, that I try and take, right? Because it's one thing to give people a bunch of positive news in a newsletter and say, hey, look at this. You probably didn't know we're actually doing better than we used to do on opioid deaths. Here's a lot of, solid progress on, housing, right, as an issue. Like we're getting more housing done. It's not enough, but the the whole idea is to show here are the ways that we are making some issues better, and to spotlight the people doing it so that anyone can find my content, come across it, and say, oh, wow, like I didn't know that there was enough good things happening to get excited about. Because again, the complicated question, this is why it's an interesting problem for me to try and work on, right? Is like, so often things get better, right? Like this question of progress, like it happens because of people working quietly out of the limelight,
Absolutely.
consistently for a long period of time, right? Like it's
and
fundamentally,
let's be real, often undercompensated.
Oh yeah, 100%, super undercompensated, right? Like our incentives are like very misaligned as society. Like it's a whole other conversation. And so it's like it's fundamentally not a sexy thing to talk about, right? It's much more interesting to be like, oh my God, look at this plane crash. And again, plane crash is horrible, right? But it's like if you read a bunch of stories about planes crashing, you're going to psychologically feel like, oh my gosh, I'm scared of flying.
Absolutely.
Even though it's quite safe, right? And so the whole vibe of what I'm trying to do is kind of produce something that is credible, is rational, is empathetic, and that people can approach it and, have the vibe that's the opposite of a doom scroll, right? That's like, okay, here's an endless feed of everything going wrong. Here's a bunch of things locally that are probably going right, and to interview the people involved in a lot of these decisions and issues gives the human-oriented perspective in addition to, the macro one provided by the curation of stories. Because it's patronizing just to talk. Like if I met someone, right, like extreme poverty is a really good story to tell, right? Every single day for the last, I think 30 years or something like 200,000 people, 300,000 people are getting a little bit richer every day, right? There's people in sub-Saharan Africa, in South America, in Asia, who, it should be more faster, but they're no longer living under an amount of money per day that we could define as extreme poverty. This is really good. Like we should all be excited about this. Like more people with more money is like a good thing. But, no one has run the headline, 300,000 people today don't live in extreme poverty anymore, which you could have run that headline every single day for the last like 30 years. Because, if I was sitting in front of somebody who, was like starving to death because they're so poor in some unfortunate place, I wouldn't say that to them. You wouldn't be like, cheer up. There's all these people, like the percentage of humans living in extreme poverty today is less than it ever has been. Like that would be a horrible thing to say. It would be patronizing. You would be like, oh my gosh, can I help you? Right. So it's important to have like the data, but also to ground these conversations in, human people who can tell their story, the perspective they have, why they're not afraid to say that they're optimistic. Like you have to approach it in a way that is empathetic and respectful and having an awareness of, there are a lot of real problems. That people have a right to be upset. I just think we focus a little too much on everything going wrong. So that's kind of how I think about why I do it this way.
Yeah, one piece of data that has been persistent over the past handful of years or so is polling folks about sort of like a happiness or satisfaction quotient, where the majority of people are coming back saying that I'm happy with my life. I feel good about my life, but the world is just a mess, right?
Oh my God, yes.
And a lot of reasons they're coming back with the world is just a mess is because all of the information that I am receiving is telling me the world is a mess or the country is a mess or my state is a mess. And so an individual who holds themselves to a standard, a particular standard of inquiry, really should be saying, why are they telling me that? Who gains? Who's to gain if I'm constantly fearful, constantly convinced that we're on a downward trajectory, even though I'm looking around and my life is improving or it's satisfactory. And it goes back to what you were talking about, in terms of incentives. And, on Making Media Now, I talk to a lot of documentary filmmakers who make very powerful, very professionally and artfully made and creatively made documentaries about stories that as you said in talking about some of the subjects you deal with on your podcast, aren't necessarily, say, sexy, right?
Yeah.
They deal with complex issues. They deal with complex incentives. They deal with complex forces at play. There is nothing intrinsically different about documentaries and reality TV shows wherein people are making a choice to watch one over the other. People
Yeah.
are making a choice to be spoon-fed particular types of stories as to others. So I guess what I'm saying is, at a certain point, the responsibility does lie with the citizenry that don't, I'm tired of being prisoner to the view of life that only one particular cable network gives me or one particular newspaper gives me.
Mm-hmm.
But I always feel like, people, you're holding the key in your hands. Like,
Yes.
There has never been a time to be alive right now where you can do a deeper dive on any subject and appreciate the nuance at play. And I think, as I went through the list of the folks that you've been speaking to over the 60-some episodes that you've done so far, that seems to be a common denominator, that people are taking on kind of gnarly missions and saying that this isn't going to be immediate or easy, but it's worth doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. You're exactly right. Yeah. And it's interesting to sit with, right? Cause like, I try to avoid a conspiratorial view, right? Where it's like, okay, there's a bunch of dudes, with mustaches, like sitting there being like, how do we make everyone depressed all the time? Right. But functionally, that might as well be true, right? Because it's the same, like when you look at the incentives that are in place, right? For like, and to some degree it's rational, right? Like you think you have evolutionarily, the downside of not noticing something that's a threat to you is permanent, right? You could die. So your brain's wired in a way that makes sense to pay more attention to things that are threatening or could scare you, right? That we're compared to the downside of not noticing something good is not as so much, right? It's like, okay, I have too many acorns for the winter, whatever. And so this instinct has like obviously served us very well, right? For a lot of like our history, and like, it's a good thing. But at the same time, it, especially today, again, it's not an accurate or helpful way to view the world all the time. Right. But that is the default mode, I would argue, of almost all mainstream media that we encounter. And so I completely agree with you when, you say, okay, you kind of have to take a little, have a little digital mental health hygiene, like I subscribe to many of these newsletters. Cause I'll tell you, this is the thing, Michael, that really changed my mind about it. Right. When I first read the Fix the News newsletter, right? Again, this incredible roundup of like all these great things happening around the world. My first reaction was, oh, wow, this is really nice. Like, what a nice break from, the relentless negativity of the news. And then after a couple of weeks, they keep pumping it out. Like I keep reading the newsletter. They send it every week. They send it twice a week. And after a month of reading it, my reaction was, okay, something's wrong. Like these people are going to run out of good news. There's no way that, all these amazing things, all these incredible developments, in human well-being and environmental well-being and stories of people cooperating and solving incredibly complex problems, like all around the world, that all this could be happening with this level of regularity and that I hadn't been hearing about it. Like, there's no way. When are these people going to run out of good news? And then a couple of months go by and I keep reading the newsletter. And then one day I read it and I'm just like, okay, now I'm mad. Like something is broken about the way.
You're mad because these stories aren't permeating the bubble that you're in.
Yes, exactly. And I was like, something is just totally off about how I learn about the state of the world and the nature of people and our ability to solve hard things. Like, again, not disputing there's horrible people out there in the world and, we should like be aware of that. But oh my God, there is so much more good out there that anyone can get excited about, like that anyone can and should get excited about. And so after that, I was like, this is just, I think something's wrong with the media.
Yeah.
And that's when I kind of felt like I should do something. I want to do something about this. And so I not only, evangelize like these great organizations, but I was like, you could adopt this lens to anywhere, but here's a place where I've lived my whole life that is beloved to me and, has a lot of good stories to tell. And so that's the angle I'm going for.
Tell me a little bit about your selection criteria when you're thinking about, hi, who do I want to talk to next? And by the way, tip of the hat to you. I saw you released an episode today with the governor of New Hampshire. That is a great get. You're speaking with Kelly Ayotte, who is the governor of New Hampshire. So applause on that one. And as somebody who knows what it takes to land a guest, that's a good get.
Yeah, no, it is. And
when you talk about, when you look at, your kind of open schedule and say, who do I want to talk to and what do I want to talk to them about and what makes them a Granite Goodness guest caliber? Yeah, it's a great question. And I wish I had like a super, like what I'd love to be able to say to you, Michael, is that like, oh, I have a beautiful spreadsheet with all these different topics that are weighted by, their importance to me and the level of interest. Like, not at all. It's been quite haphazard because it started as, it's only really in the last couple of months that I've, again, this isn't a job for me. This is just like a thing I do for fun and is only now beginning to be monetizable in any way that I'd want to do. So it started as a hobby, and, the first 10 episodes was just my friends, people I'd worked with or knew personally who I thought wouldn't be afraid to come on the podcast and say, I'm an optimist. Here's why about my line of work. So that's just like my personal professional world. And then after that, it was just, a rolling selection of, okay, who's somebody who can speak about a topic I haven't yet really touched. Right. And again, for any of these, you could do such a deeper, like, you could do an entire podcast just about housing in New Hampshire, right? Let alone like there's an infinite level of specificity to which you could go. All I'm trying to do is curate, I run through this stupid fantasy in my head where it's like, I don't know, someday I'll be stuck in an elevator with somebody and the elevator will break and, they'll be like, oh, darn it, this sucks. Everything sucks. And I'll be like, well, maybe not. I have a podcast where I interview people who are optimists and they work on hard problems, and they're going to be like, well, that's just one person. And then I can say, well, actually there's like 500 people, right, who represent all these different topics, all these different problems across New England. So broken elevators are how I can get people to finally listen to my podcast.
Yeah, 100%.
Note to self.
I haven't tried it, but I think it could work.
I think it could. I think that's called a hostage situation. However,
yeah, 100%. But yeah, and the other thing I want to touch on with that, right? Because you mentioned the governor. Like, again, I have my own political biases. Like, I wear those on my sleeve. I've written on my website like what kind of my beliefs are and how they inform the work I do with Granite Goodness. But I do try really hard to not look at these issues through the lens of politics, right? Sure. And I understand the argument. Like, sure, you can look at everything through the political lens. Like, I hear that. And I do talk to politicians on the show. Usually not. Like, there's only really been 5, I think, out of the 61 I've done. And when I do talk to, elected officials, the conversations I have with them are not, it's important to me that they are not what people are used to hearing in like just the mudfest that is like American politics, right?
Well, I think that's one of the places where your New England focus is a differentiator, because if you look at the political parties in New England, the most conservative Republican leader in New England would be considered a liberal, and so many other parts of the country. And one of the reasons for that is, that whatever that taciturn, that combination of sort of taciturn and optimistic, community-focused individual in New England basically doesn't want to be just pandered to. So you really can't pander to the right too far, in New England. And, I'm sure some people would say that there's too much pandering to the left, but, you've got a Republican governor in a blue state. in New Hampshire. So and I think that somebody like a Kelly Ayotte is intelligent enough to know that I can't just run hard right because I'm never going to get elected in New Hampshire.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And that's a thing that I treasure and value. I mean, even New Hampshire is a weird, like, and people debate, right? It's like, is it purple? Is it red? Is it blue? And it's like, it's all the above. The state government goes back and forth, between Democrat and Republican. It's been Republican the last couple of cycles, but our federal elections, right? We voted Democrat for president for all of our congressional representatives pretty consistently for the last like 10 or 15 years, I think.
Yep.
And so again, I hear where people are passionate about politics, and obviously politics is super important, and I have views, but it's an asset in my view, right? That at least in New Hampshire, right? Like it's very much it is not a captured state in terms of its political ideology, and I was happy to talk. Like it's a huge opportunity for me.
Absolutely.
My show is not yet at the place. Like some of these really important people I've been able to get on the show, like Maggie Hassan and Kelly Ayotte, they're like, hey, this is nice. We like what you're doing. We'll give you 30 minutes. And, because they're super important, they'll show up a little late. So I get like 20 minutes with them. And so all my friends are like, oh my God, what did you ask the governor? What did you ask her? And I'm like, you really can't talk about anything in 20 minutes. It was a very cordial conversation. She was very polite to me, and
but the fact that they're showing up on your podcast shows that they feel there's validity in the message that you're putting out there. Yeah.
I'd like to think that any politician worth their salt should jump at the chance to be like, wait, here's an opportunity to like talk about being optimistic. And I know that politics, like they have a reputation maybe for being like toxically optimistic, and that's a whole other thing. But no, I mean, I agree. New Hampshire's, political stripes and New England's, right, writ large are unique. They're an asset, and I'm happy to interact with these people in the capacity they'll have me. Cause they are our elected leaders, and it's important and it's an opportunity, right? Like, even again, biased to New Hampshire, like they're so accessible in New Hampshire. Like we have so many state reps for some reason. We have like 400 bajillion of them. And so the opportunity to like and sometimes people are cynical about that. And I understand why, because like we should pay them, and they debate the structure of it and is it good or bad, but you can't deny they are very accessible. Like you can call your state rep's cell phone here. It's crazy. And it's unlike almost any other place on earth, I would argue. And so the threshold is low, like to get involved in this tradition of direct democracy, right? Like, about your neighbors, you go to the town hall, you get involved. Like that's a very New England thing. Like we do that really, really well. And it's a very American value that I'm proud that we do well here. Yeah. That I want to show off.
Yeah. What kind of response have you been getting from listeners to your show, readers of your newsletter? I know that you seem to have picked up some real momentum over the past couple of months, in particular. What are listeners or readers coming away feeling? Aside from, hey, Andy, it's great that you got that guest, but what are they coming away feeling about in terms of in opposition, say, to what they might come away from if they were just doom scrolling on their phone?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's exactly that. I mean, here's what I'll say. Nobody has been confused about why I'm doing Granite Goodness, right? Which is a nice, like, I give people the pitch. I say, hey, positive stories that aren't fluffy, based in New England. I cover things that are substantive and optimistic, that are granite and good, right? Like that's the pitch. And not a single person has been like, well, why are you doing that? Right. So there's the opportunity for me. Like there's only an excuse or a reason to do what I'm doing because we're so used to like the negative miasma of everything, right? Like optimism is a very subversive and to many people provocative attitude to have, particularly lately, right? It's like, the federal government has been really disruptive and different in a lot of ways since the last election in America. So there's a lot of people who are looking for like some reason to feel, however people feel about that, like, oh my God, are there people out there who are, making a stable, consistent approach to like a thing that I care about? And so the response has been really positive. My stuff is very modest. I have 700 subscribers on my website, who get my podcast and newsletter. And right now, maybe I get 100, 120, 130 downloads per podcast. On LinkedIn, I publish my newsletters. I have about 1,500 subscribers there. And so there's probably an overlap between, I would estimate right now, there's 1,500 people who are like really aware and engaged in what Granite Goodness is. But it's early days, and I think that the ceiling for what I'm doing is a lot higher than that. It'll never be huge, obviously, because like it's niche, and even this idea of like good news that isn't fluffy, but that is substantive, but regionally concentrated. Like it's a very, very niche thing, but it's the problem I want to work on, and that I find interesting. Because I've done other entrepreneurial things in the past, and I feel pretty strongly like when you think of projects in your own life, right? Like anyone listening to this, like where I think entrepreneurs or people doing anything, whether they use that word, creator or anything, like where you're going to be the most motivated and interested to manifest a thing is where you believe that your efforts will make a difference, like a marginal difference, like
absolutely,
because you're doing the thing. Like you're not just going to go create a thing that would exist anyway, or that someone else would doing. Right. And so like, I don't think anyone else is out there who is really enthusiastic about this progress journalism movement, who wants to bring it to New England and do it in exactly the way that I'm doing it. Like, I just don't see anyone doing it. And, so like it wouldn't be happening if I wasn't doing it, and I want it to exist. I'm creating the thing that I like want to see. So it's exciting for me, and I would do it for fun anyway. And, the idea that people find value in it and, maybe are willing to run ads or something is like really fun for me. So yeah, the response has been very positive. And not just my mom.
Not just your mom. Well,
she loves it though. Yeah.
That's a great place to start. Yeah. The adjective that keeps coming to me is it's empowering. That the when you hear about stories, when you're involved in a story, whether it's with a company or an organization or just a group of people who feel like, here's a situation, I think we can improve it. And you do improve it. And it doesn't mean that everybody in that organization or everybody in that group is in mind meld where they all think the same way about everything all the time. No, that's not necessary. Mm-hmm. Because the constant drone of negativity, and when I say negativity, I mean purposeful negativity, like a desire to keep people divided. Mm-hmm. There's nothing ennobling about that. There's nothing empowering about that. And if you're of the mindset that currently in the U.S. there's a move toward authoritarianism, and a lot of people are of that mindset, right. Well, goal number one of the authoritarian is to keep people feeling small, to keep them feeling like they don't have a chance, that they just got to duck and cover and maybe poke their head up when the storm passes, if it passes. And I feel like Granite Goodness is an example of lighting a candle instead of cursing the darkness.
Mm-hmm. No, you are exactly right, and that is why I do it. Again, to quote my heroes, when we only hear stories of doom and decline, we come to expect those things. Right.
Absolutely.
And you see this now, like I really do. I do it for everyone, but a lot of it is for younger people. Right. And I just turned 30. And you see the stats on how anxious and frightened like young people are, because that's just, they don't know anything other than, growing up in this, super media saturated environment. They're getting endless stories of like the lowest common denominator, attention grabbing things presented to them on all these different platforms all the time. And you wonder why, like, they're so anxious all the time. And I just like, when I think of how good and smart all the people that I know are, and how good and smart like all these people I don't know are, like, I get upset when I think of how dispirited people feel, and how poor the leadership is, in not just in politics, but like in all these different places. And there are so many reasons that I know about and I'm trying to like spread the word about, to feel better and to feel genuinely good about the ability of people, to come together and solve hard things. And it's not an attitude that is commonplace nowadays, but it's the one, as you said. I mean, I think most people are good, but there are people in the world who I don't think that they have the collective self-interest at heart, and nothing benefits those people more than people thinking everything is hopeless and there's no point all the time. It's like, if you're not an optimist on some level, what are you do? Like, what's the point even to being alive or to caring about anything? And so it's like reinvigorating this idea of like, hey, actually, we can be a little optimistic. Like, again, just with like the biggest baby gloves on you can imagine. Like, this is kind of how I try and frame it. It's like, I'm not at all trying to tell people like they have to be a toxically positive person, but to have a better awareness of the incredible progress that has been made on a lot of really hard stuff.
Yeah.
It matters that people know about it, because then they have an awareness of what's possible. And there are so many things about the world today that are true, that were considered pie in the sky, impossible, totally unrealistic, that are true and good today. And we take them for granted because people don't understand how unlikely and how miraculous it was to, figure out mRNA technology, right? To synthesize a vaccine in the nick of time in all these different ways for this pandemic that we really like. That's a crazy story that people don't know about. You could talk about, the support for same-sex marriage in the United States or even around the world, right? Like, that has advanced at a trajectory that many people probably didn't see coming. There's even right now, right? Like, this is a really crazy one that a lot of people don't know about. We are possibly in the beginning of a big decarceration trend in the United States. I've been hearing all my life about how America is, we imprison a ton of people, both on an absolute basis and a relative basis, compared to other countries. And, many things about the criminal justice system are like really messed up and it's deeply unfair. Like, not disputing that, but just this idea that that's like a really complicated, horrible issue that I've been hearing about forever, is never getting better. And then just a couple months ago, The Atlantic ran this piece, and again, people in the know, they know about it, but like, okay, a lot of these long-term trends around, crime rate is getting lower, people are having more opportunities in their lives, are all converging. And, people have made reforms in the criminal justice system. Like, put it this way, in 2010, which I think was like the peak of the incarcerated population, it was like 1.6 million people or something, or Americans. The view at that time was, okay, if we work really, really hard, maybe we can, cut this in half, like in the next 15 or 20 years. Like, if we do all the reforms and we do all the things in the cities and counties across America, like, we could put a big dent in the number of people in prison. And like, that would be a crazy goal. And that was like the wildly optimistic view. Right now, we're probably on track, if current, demographic and trends hold up, to exceed that, possibly by 2030. We could see as few as 600,000 Americans in prison by the year 2030, I believe. Again, this is all like, you can go read this article in The Atlantic, or it's also in NPR. Like, this is all real stuff. You can look it up. And so this is just an astonishing victory and a really positive development for like human rights, you could argue, and for just like the well-being of America as a society. Like, we figured out, okay, a lot of parts of the criminal justice system, like, they don't work well, they're unfair. And that trend is the result of millions and millions of kind of micro reforms and cooperation and all these deeper, trends and demography. And it's a really, again, even one person, right, imprisoned who shouldn't be there, even the concept of prison, like, there's a whole nuanced conversation we could have, but this is an astonishingly good thing. That is beginning to happen that like nobody knows about. Right. And so it's like, whoa, this is incredible. Like, why don't we should all be curious about this story. And there's stuff like that all the time, Michael. And that's the stuff that makes me passionate, but also a little angry of like, we're so lucky here, like you think of your ancestors, right? Like all of us are immigrant ancestors. Like my great grandparents, immigrated from Italy 100 years ago. The DeMeo's, like they would kill to have the opportunities that I have in my life.
Right.
And you think of all the hard work that people before us put into making the world better, giving opportunities to their family, and especially here in America, right? Like the imperfect, never-ending project that is America. Like, I don't know. I think it's patriotic to criticize your country, to want to make it better. And it's just like, we have an opportunity here to do that. And I just, and there's a lot of good people who deserve more of our attention. That's what the project is about.
Absolutely, and I
That's
think
my
that
rant.
your tagline for your podcast is, you share optimistic stories of progress, innovation, and problem solving across New England. I would say that your optimism is a clear-eyed optimism. It's not the optimism of someone who's walking around with blinders on saying, "Don't tell me bad news. Don't tell me about the badness." No, it's someone who says, "Yes, the badness exists. What are the incentives behind the badness? Who's looking to benefit from the badness?" And saying, "No, I am optimistic that at the core of the human spirit, there's more that unites us than divides us." And to your point, there's something about the core of New Englanders that isn't going to be led into the darkness just because that's more that's more financially beneficial for some interests than others. So I couldn't be behind the spirit of your undertaking more than I am.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And there is so much about, like, it's both things, it's an interesting framing just to put on the news, right? To curate all these stories together. Like, that's cool. And you can apply that to anywhere, but selfishly, I do think New England is a really, really remarkable place, a really unique place that is just so at the forefront of all these different things. And even, part of the reason I like doing it in New Hampshire, right? Like proudly hosted New Hampshire is, New Hampshire is kind of this black sheep in New England. Like we just don't, and every state's unique, right? Like you could make that argument on all of them, but New Hampshire is always the odd one out in like all these different ways, maybe politically more so. And so people are definitely not used to hearing this sort of attitude. Like, I could give you endless examples of people talking down, to New Hampshire. And I'm over here looking like, I don't know, people, this is like a really competitively state ranked for like, it's a good place to live. And there's all these different ways that we solve interesting problems. And, but I am an unabashed champion of New England values, and our little corner of the United States, and what we stand for and believe in, and all the good that we produce for the world. And it's a really, really special slice of the world. It's ours, it's mine, and I'm biased, like I acknowledge that, but and this is like to speak.
I'm not gonna say you're biased. I'm gonna say you're proud, and
yeah, I am proud.
And regional pride is important.
Yeah, well, and to speak a little, to the mission of like making media now, right? Like this is so cool about, and you must see this more than me, right? Like I think people are so used to all things being nationalized or globalized, even, right?
Absolutely,
especially in issues, right? Like they're like, okay, we're going to frame things in this way. We pay attention to like all the most giant things happening at the federal level in the world. And it's like, okay, but we have all these tools and ability now. People can make media about themselves. They can make media about their neighbors.
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
yes.
Like Troy is crushing it. Like Seacoast Stories is doing so well because he just, this, veteran experienced podcaster moved to this really unique place and was like, no one's making a podcast about the Seacoast area and the people here. Like, I'm going to do it. And like people are responding to it so much. And I'm so happy that like he's there and doing it. And it's such a good example of like, why don't we tell stories about the people around us? Like, because you can go meet and talk to all the people on Granite Goodness, like we're all here and approachable.
Almost all fear is rooted in ignorance. It's why like the person that's never ventured from their small town believes they have a rock solid insight into the crime that's taking place in a big city 3,000 miles away that they've never been to, but that's what they tell them on the news. I mean, and these efforts that you're making goes a long way toward, illuminating that. So I want to leave you with a bit of Granite Goodness. A wonderful example of Granite Goodness takes place in Pembroke, in Suncook Village, at a place called Pembroke City Limits. My brother is the co-owner of the place, and on the 30th of September, it's a Tuesday night, we're going to be screening a film called Gone Guys, made by another New England organization called Well Told Films. Gone Guys deals with the issue of young men and boys in crisis in America. It's a super powerful, super insightful 48-minute film that we would just love folks to come on out, have a beer, have some great food, watch this short movie. Let's talk about it. How does it resonate in your life or the lives of the people that you know? But it's a wonderful example of actual Granite Goodness, people looking at a problem and saying, let's do something about this. It's, and it's all from New England. So I feel like it checks all the boxes in terms of the mission of Granite Goodness. Andy DeMeo, thank you for making the time to chat today. I've really enjoyed it. And let's leave folks making sure that they know where to find all of your fine work. Yeah.
GraniteGoodness.com. You can find it all there. The podcast is hosted there, but I'm on Spotify, I'm on Apple, I'm on YouTube, I'm on everything. On Instagram, I'm at Granite Goodness. On LinkedIn, I'm, on Granite Goodness. So that's it, baby. New Hampshire, New England optimism. You Google that, you'll find me. And really appreciate the time, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. All right, man. We'll talk soon.
All right.